before 12. We've got 3 speakers lined up. As you come on, please, as the etiquette, the new etiquette of this year is, just put yourselves on mute. You can have your camera on or off, as depending on how well you're dressed. And I'll introduce what we're up to in a minute or two as more people join, and then we'll go to the first speaker at 11:05.
It's Paul Connell here from ODI Leeds. I usually chair these, but BI is our partners in this. They're going to take over this week, and then in 2 weeks' time we'll do the next one. And if you want to just introduce yourself in the chat, please feel free to do that and say hi to everybody.
This is great. We've got 41 people in so far, which is smashing. So Paul and I have been talking about doing loosely a couple of these a month. In the chat and outside of it, please let us know of topics you'd like to look at, speakers you'd like to recommend. Apart from anything else, these are creating a really nice network of people who are kind of all into the same stuff. So we've got some ideas for speakers, and we'll gradually sort of fill a potential agenda. And Scott, we might put that on the website perhaps as kind of placeholders, and we'll sort of tweet about who we've got coming on. But any ideas and any contacts, please let us know. We definitely don't have a monopoly on all the interesting people in this space, but we're trying as quickly as we can to kind of meet them all.
Mark's got some exciting news this week in that we've now got a website.
Yeah, which I can show. I don't know if I trust myself to share my screen and unshare it quickly, but I might give it a try. So hopefully you can all see that. We have a new website which we will put out on Twitter. Thanks to our brilliant friends at ODI Leeds, we've got a ton of resources already on here. We've got all of the blogs that have been written, links to Google Docs. In events we're going to have on here that you can register for future ones, but we've also got recordings of all the previous ones, and I'd really encourage people to have a kind of look through these. One of the titles that kind of stood out for me was building a better data set than the government have done, which I think is a title that Paul gave them, but from the presentation we saw, it was certainly true. And that's the kind of spirit of these sessions, is to link people together, get the data out there in the open. It's probably formalized over the last year or so since Paul and I kind of got back in contact, to a point where on that website we have put down 4 pillars of things that we're kind of interested in doing. So you can think of us as a kind of lobby group or whatever, but or a cult, but we're just interested in getting more data out there. We want to make some important points. An example of that is saving lives, not data. So we're launching a Twitter handle today, which is Lives Not Data. And as I hope you'll see from the presentations that we've got, we want to create that kind of stronger argument for using data for public good, and not always going to a sometimes lazy privacy concern argument, which we obviously have to take into account, but there's so much good that can be done by linking data if it's done properly and fairly and securely, and we kind of want to make an argument for that. So we are at 11:05. We've got 46 people in the room, which is fantastic, really exciting for us as sort of chairing the first one of these. As I say, track the website, track us on Twitter. Hey, Paul, are you happy to keep admitting, just so I don't miss people?
Yeah.
And I
leave it with us.
Thank you. So our first speaker is Richard Vickery. I'll let him introduce himself briefly. We've met locally in Kent, and I think through lockdown, and from Boris's briefing on Saturday, who specifically talked about you must go to hospital if you think you're at risk of injury or harm. It is a sort of not even an obtuse allusion to domestic abuse, and Richard's been trying to break down some barriers the last couple of years, and I've come in at the last minute as usual to try and help, and he's done some amazing stuff. So Richard, over to you. and I will monitor the chat for questions from you. Try and keep it to 15 minutes, and I'll give you a kind of gentle wave as we go.
Okay, thank you, Mark, and thanks for the invite, and good morning to everybody. I'm going to try and share my screen with you now. Hopefully this will work. So I'll get straight into it. I'm going to have to whiz through these slides, everybody, so I apologise for that first off, because there's quite a lot to get through. Hopefully you can see the presentation, and nobody tells me otherwise, I'll assume that's the case.
Go for it,
so
Richard.
this is around a 2-year journey for me. I suppose it was longer than that now, tracking the characteristics of lethal and potentially lethal intimate partner violence with partners. So a little bit about me, I'll say I'll whiz through this. So my job up until very recently is that of a senior investigating officer for Kent Police, which essentially means that I run one of the 2 major incident rooms in the county, and my primary job really is investigating or leading investigations into homicides, and sadly of those, a fair number of those are domestic homicides, intimate partner homicides, and those that I was involved with, historically there was either none or very little police contact prior to the killing. So in policing terms, what that means is that an officer hadn't attended, we hadn't had a call and completed the domestic abuse risk assessment form, which then would have got logged into our system. So we didn't know about them essentially until the actual catastrophic event took place. And after an investigation and the trial, etc., there's always a domestic homicide review, which I expect many of you have heard from and may well have been involved in. That's where partners get together with a chair, and the investigation is discussed, and very often what may or could have been done to prevent it. And probably without exception, it was always the case that there was data amongst partners, including the police, that hadn't been shared between us that may possibly have triggered intervention or even possibly prevention. So the case that started this all off for me, as I was doing my day job, was a sad case of a young girl who lost both her parents. Essentially, her father murdered her mother. And when we looked at the retrospective data, amongst that was that there was a child protection referral. The child had been self-harming, and that was undoubtedly as a result of her parents' domestic situation. The victim had been suffering from depression. She discussed the case with a GP, and it was again to do with the difficulty in the marriage. Interestingly, the offender had been to A&E on a number of occasions, essentially discharged, deemed probably symptomatic of anxiety and mental health issues. As far as the police were concerned, there had been 2 low-level domestic abuse incidents, essentially harassment. They were recently separated, and they were deemed as standard or low risk on both those occasions. On the 3rd occasion, he was arrested and he was put before a court for remand application. And I guess due to the low level or the low risk of what the offender was deemed to be from a police perspective and a court perspective, there wasn't sufficient to remand him. He was released on bail and he murdered the victim. So looking quickly at collaborative studies between police and health, there's none that I can find that are exclusively domestic abuse, and I'm sure there might well be one out there, but from my research couldn't find any. But there has been some in terms of assault. And the first one that I could find was in 1987, which was Shepherd and others, and that was really the first cross-tracking of violent crime across counties, across a policing area. And what that found was that 11% of victims reported by the police had attended, the police attended, and only 23% within the boundaries of the police area where the study took place had attended the hospital were actually recorded by the police. Sutherland in 2002, this was a 6-month study. Again, exclusive recordings by A&E represented 65% or over 65%, and just under 24% recorded exclusively by police. The crossover was only 10.8%, so recorded by both agencies. Therefore, essentially any analysis by the police of the assault problem in that particular policing area could never identify the full picture. And then lastly, in Denmark in 2006, again, a similar picture, 74% of men and 69% of women who had been assaulted and attended A&E departments hadn't reported to police. And the other notable finding for me really was that albeit police recorded a steady increase in the study period of violence, from an A&E point of view, the frequency was steady on a single level. So identifying a consistent pattern of violence in those particular policing districts in Denmark, from a police point of view, it was changing. From an A&E point of view, it wasn't. So the police really are never going to be in a position there to identify what the real picture looks like. And this is all interpersonal violence. It wasn't specific use. So understanding that single agency data is useful, but it's a very limited contributor to a full explanation of the pattern of serious and lethal intimate partner violence. I asked myself a question 2.5, 3 years ago. So how hard could it be to share data with our partners, including health? Because from a DHR point of view, and the ones that I went to, I was thinking, well, are we not shutting the stable door off the horse has bolted? If we could identify precursor signals and we all knew about them, particularly the police knew about them, would it be possible to maybe save some lives and reduce harm? That was a very naive question, because the answer transpired to be extremely hard, as we'll find out. So I'm not an academic, I'm a copper at the end of the day, but I had a look at the looked at the literature. There's conflicting academic opinions still now around escalation, repetition, relationship context, etc., which culminates in domestic abuse events. The systematic study of whole family characteristics across agencies appears absent from the literature. They concentrate on offenders and victims generally. The evidence base behind DASH, which is the National Police Risk Assessment, although that's recently changed, I must say, to a new risk assessment, but it's still subjective. Its weakest point was the absence of a large controlled sample in its development, and without a controlled sample, the likelihood of false positive risk assessment errors is difficult to calculate, if not impossible. And DASH uses a single grade on a linear scale to describe multifaceted threats. So essentially what it does, it looks at one type of domestic abuse to cover every eventuality, one size fits all, if you like. So that's essentially female intimate partner victims by a male offender. And of course, domestic violence doesn't all just look like that. There are a couple of police studies, historically, one in Thames Valley, one in Dorset, that found respectively false negative prediction rates of 80% and 7%. That means that we've been out, the police done a DASH risk assessment, and a high risk hasn't been made in the majority of those serious or fatal or acute IPV cases. And conversely, a 99% false positive rate. So where officers have gone out and made a high risk assessment and then either a low risk or no further offences occur. And that's a massive impact on resources, not just for the police, but for other agencies, particularly when you think that all of those are going to get referred to a multi-agency risk assessment conference. So 99% of the time, what we're saying is they perhaps shouldn't actually be at that multi-agency risk assessment conference. One thing was consistent, and that scholars, without exception, were consistent in their view that about the importance of health data analysis in determining potential preliminary risk factors for IPV. So what I wanted to do was look at 12 months before an event happening, so a lethal event happening, what was going on in both police terms and health terms. And to cut a very long story short, and despite unwavering support, certainly from people in public health and your host today, Mark, the retrospective data from health wasn't forthcoming, and that was generally due to different interpretations of the legislation across the trusts from IG leads. Some agreed, but some didn't. So I used police data in isolation alone to start with. So I looked at 6 years worth of data from 2012 to 2017, and I came up with 70 families who had suffered either lethal or near lethal abuse, and a randomly selected control group of 140 families who had suffered lesser domestic abuse, and they were split into those three family types. I did continue to pester NHS throughout that period. for their data, or the A&E data. So these are the two police research questions. I won't read them out, they're self-explanatory. Again, what I was trying to do is look at the 12-month period before an event happening. I wanted to see what was going on or what we knew about in that period of time. And I also wanted to see if we looked at family characteristics rather than those concentrating on offender victim through DASH, whether that would make any difference to the risk projection. So the variables in terms of the police data were selected. I based that on IPV theory, previous longitudinal studies covering socio-demographic, previous criminal history, ethnicity, psychological characteristics, developmental and relationship characteristics. You can see there on the graphic on the right, they were the variables that I looked at in terms of this study. They were family and family member focus as opposed to just victim and offender, and then also the variables that defined family structure and type were included. So just very quickly then,
Five minutes, Richard. 5 minutes, if that's all right. Thanks, mate.
Okay. Very quickly then, insights from the police data. What we found were that female victims represented 84% of victims. 76% of offences were in areas of higher deprivation. 57, this is an important point, 57% of those acute case families had not had any previous risk assessment from the police. So the reliance on the DASH risk assessment to focus on prior contact missed over half of those acute cases. There was contact in 4% of cases where a risk assessment was completed. Another interesting fact, 87% of the murders were missed because there was no prior police contact, therefore no risk assessment by the police. Where there was a risk assessment completed, 33% of the acute cases were previously determined as high risk, so that represented a 67% false negative rate, the risk assessment wrong. And then conversely, across the whole population where DASH was completed, there was over a 99% false positive rate. And that reflected the studies in other police areas, as you can see from the graphic, Dorset, Thames Valley and Hampshire. If you look at the no prior risk assessments and also the false negative rates, very high. So these were the, looking at a family lens, these were the significant results in terms of various different types of testing, dependent upon the variable type. So I won't go through all of that, but some of them aren't surprising. So if there was other crime by the victim historically in that 12 months, that was significant. Previous violence offender, not surprising, I guess. Prior instance of DA hiring, all of these hiring the case group. Biological father was interesting. That was more representative in the case group than the control group, where there was a biological father present. And then again, probably not surprising, cumulative family violence, more prevalent in the, significantly so in the case group. And then when we looked at the categorical variables, childless families, 4.8 times more likely in the case group, other families more likely in the control group. And then the last three, probably hardly surprising. So where we had a marker on our system for mental health, child protection or suicidal ideation, also far more prevalent in the case group. So those that suffered an acute case. So what from that, okay, so findings centered on single agency data will still continue to frustrate the identification of a significant assessment of the paradigm in Kent of DA. We can't really ignore the external validity because it's replicated over 4 large other policing areas. And bearing in mind that the 57% of families of no prior DA report in that case group, the importance of other agency data can't be understated when we think that only 1 in 5 intimate partner violence are reported to the police. And then I asked this question, can we carry on using this risk assessment process, which increasingly seems to be a flawed practice? Perhaps we ought to look at a taxonomy of classification of different abuse types. And police are only going to be able to gauge levels of escalation based on what's reported to them. So we're talking about 20% of the picture. 83% of the DHR reviews, the domestic homicide reviews, all identified backgrounds of suicidal ideation, violence, etc., etc. I'm going to skip through these really quickly. It is important, but I'm going to go to because of the time. This was the argument that was proffered to IG leads across the acute trust in Kent. But simply put, we could talk about that all day. So the argument put forward really centred around the public interest task, derived from the prevention of lethal or near lethal intimate partner violence. The substantial public interest to allow for the processing of special category data, i.e. the health data from an A&E, was the potential to invoke police and partner intervention as a subsequent to processing and analysis of the data prior to a lethal or near lethal IP event occurring in the future. And it was proportionate in terms of the scientific research purposes, as the ultimate aim was to save lives and prevent serious harm. 21.4 of GDPR talks about the right to object, but where we are looking at the processing is necessary for the performance of a task, that task being to identify those at risk of lethal, near lethal IPV, and the public interest is reducing harm and saving lives. That allows an abstraction of that objection. So the sticking point really, and I accept the interpretation of data protection law and guidance is subjective. There's really only one way to interpret it. There was discord and disagreement, not only in terms of the interpretation of the legal basis to share data, but also in terms of what the research was. Was it medical or scientific? Well, my view was we weren't performing medical research in terms of any clinical intervention, but it was scientific research in pursuit of law enforcement prevention purpose. And then different interpretations of the terms necessary and substantial public interest was also another sticking point. So with Mark's help, and not wishing to embarrass him, with significant help, there were presentations to in East Kent, following presentations to Kent Database Ethics Committee, and then recently the executive management team approved the research in East Kent, and then 2 of the other trusts subsequently came on board and 1 didn't. So very quickly, this was the one-off exchange protocol. So we completed the DPA forms. Clear data was sent to ISB in the data warehouse, and that was matched by the PMI. And the graphic there you can see on the right pretty much means the way that the data exchange took place. And of course, once that data exchange took place, any identifiable data was so once the data had been matched, comparative and correlational statistics were performed. Part 1 of the analysis looks at how much knowledge police had of families that went on to have a future domestic incident and how much health knew via A&E data. And the second part is the work in progress. Some hot off press slides from last night that I'll try to include in here if we get time to look at them.
Richard, sorry to interrupt. I just want to make time for the other 2 speakers.
Yeah, of course.
We'll publish everything, and
yeah.
Paul's suggesting in the chat that we'll write a blog about it as well, which is kind of the method of doing that, which we'd like to do with you, if that's all right.
Yeah,
I just want to ask 2 quick questions.
Yeah.
One is from John in the chat, and is about, do you think there's potential, and notwithstanding your point about how difficult it is to get health data, could you go out further to schools data, given that a lot of this is about families? And the second question from me is about how much you think the COVID notices have helped and will help make the next 2 years of this maybe less painful than the last 2 years. So the first one about schools data, which is John's question.
Yeah, so the first one I can answer. We did get schools data. Unfortunately, to get 6 years of data at that time, back in 2018, meant they would have to do manual searches of paper records because of their IT system. So they didn't have the capacity to do that. So they provided 2 years worth, but because the data sample is so small in IPV, serious IPV, it wasn't sufficient to get any meaningful analysis from. So that doesn't, yes, there wasn't an issue getting the data from education. It was just the quality and the quantity of it that determined that we could make it.
So that might be a question that we hold for Chris, who's up next, when we get to link data sets, bringing in police data, health data, education data, all alongside each other. How big a deal was the COPI notice, do you think?
I think it's got to make things easier over the next couple of years in terms of data sharing, without question. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that was a lever for this in the last 2-3 months, certainly from your input as well.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm really sorry to have rushed you, because
No, sorry.
we
There's
could
just
easily
lots to
do an
get
hour
through.
on this. But we will keep in contact, and we'll
Yeah.
write this up, you, me, and Paul, if that's all right. Can
Cool.
I just ask you to stop sharing, and I'll
I
get
shall do
Chris
that
up.
now.
But thanks a lot, Richard.
Yeah,
As
my
you come on,
apologies for
Chris.
overrunning.
That's all right. That's all right. It's my fault for trying to get too much in.
Yeah.
Chris, you might address that in your linked data session as well. So if you go ahead and share your screen now, Chris Farmer.
Yeah.
Thank you. So about 15 minutes, and I'll give you a nudge, Chris, if you need one.
Yeah. You can hear me okay?
Yeah, all good.
I appreciate this is obviously being recorded and subsequently shared, so I might not be as controversial as I'd like to be, but
I think
No,
you should at
please,
this stage in your
please.
career. At this
We've
stage in
all-
your
we-
career, Chris.
I'm not that old, Mark. So, I mean, great to hear Richard's stuff, and you know, just a reflection on just how difficult it was to link that data. And I will not attribute the quotes, but I might come to some things I heard during the discussion, which were quite scary, really. So I'm going to talk about data in healthcare. I'm a renal physician practicing and also an academic at the University of Kent in the Centre for Health Services Studies. I'm really going to talk about, I was going to try not to talk about COVID too much, because we've all had too much of it, but actually I think it changes so much that we're going to have to discuss that as, I think, a huge opportunity in terms of data sharing in the future. So I'm going to talk about a few of the barriers, a bit about predictive modeling in healthcare and some of the work that we've done. Wearables, Internet of Things, some work that we did with the all-party parliamentary group on AI, and I know James Hadlow, who presented to them, is in the audience today, and then talk about the open data pledges without preempting Mark's discussion too much. So barriers, we are beset by regulatory reporting and the requirement for operational dashboards. One of my pet hates is the RAG chart, which is regularly in use across the NHS, and I was not surprised to see one in the presentations on Saturday night. So a lot of our operational work is quite turgid and it interferes with our ability to innovate in terms of data presentation. Expertise. This, I think, may well change in health, and Mark and I have seen this already, that a number of people are reflecting following the COVID, well, the first COVID pandemic, and are maybe thinking that working as a quant in a bank in the city isn't necessarily as fulfilling as it might be, and are really looking to healthcare and other places to work. And we've certainly seen that in people coming forward, thinking about working with us. So that's a great positive, and hopefully that will continue. But at the moment, we're well aware that health doesn't pay as much as other areas in terms of data analytics, and it's often very difficult to recruit. This is a huge barrier, and I'll move on to a more detailed rant maybe about this in a minute, but security and regulatory bodies regarding the secondary use of data are very difficult to navigate. And as Richard alluded to, it's not necessarily because of the wording of the legislation. It's discussion and argument about the interpretation of such legislation. And yes, we were in discussions about whether this was medical or scientific research. And also, interestingly, and the impact of COVID on this, which I'll come to in a minute, has been, during the discussions, I heard arguments saying that data privacy in certain circumstances trumps preventing, in this sense, severe intimate personal partner violence or murder. Now that seems to me to be completely preposterous as an idea, but these arguments are put forward, and I think we've come a very, very long way since March of this year in what we are prepared to do or allow in terms of data usage. And I think it's an opportunity for us to really demonstrate the benefit of that. On the counter argument, I think when I'm trying to work out how we are going to link health and other data, it's not about the legislation. It's about passing the Daily Mail test that, you know, are they going to see this as something they can put on the front page? And I think the absolute key to this is, and this is part of Mark's discussion later, is public and patient involvement and engagement. It's being open, it's having open websites, it's publishing what you've used data for, what the results of that use of data are, and it's obviously allowing people clear and straightforward routes to opting out if they wish to do so. And I think you know, lots of efforts have been made nationally and regionally around this. It is very difficult, very time consuming, but it is absolutely key if we are going to win the public trust in terms of use of data. And the final thing, which is obviously in linking data, is the database structure. And we've had many discussions around problematic areas linking either health and other social care data, or even health data between organizations. And I'm not going to go into great detail about that, but I'm sure this is a learned audience and we're all fully cognizant of the massive problems in terms of codified and non-codified data in healthcare. Kent, we have some great opportunities. My hexagonal drawing is sort of designed to look a little bit like the peninsula. That is one of our advantages. We have a very complete data set. So we are we are surrounded by sea. We have pretty much one laboratory service centered across 3 acute hospital trusts, and we have increasingly very good relationships between primary care, secondary care, social care, community care, and other agencies such as the police, as we've discussed. We have an academic element, and we are aiming for this data to feed into a research consortium covering Kent, Surrey, Sussex. Because of the demographic of Kent, the longitudinal nature of this data is very good as well. So what have we been doing in the last 10 years BC, that being before COVID? A lot of work on predictive analytics, looking at individual factors, social factors, adherence factors, but also Mark and I have been exploring how we might apply predictive analytics in terms of organizational structure so that we actually plan our health services based upon facts rather than political or other arguments. And so modeling how we deliver services to best serve our population. So some of the predictive analytics we've looked at have been around, can we predict people who might not come to outpatients? That might be because they've been to outpatients 3 times in the last week. It might be other characteristics or whatever. And how can we engage people who don't necessarily engage with healthcare as best they should? I've done a lot of work in risk modeling in health, including predicting acute kidney injury, falls and death in the elderly, from analysing primary care data, particularly prescription data, the deteriorating patient in hospital. So we've done work with the Nuffield Trust and linking observation data across multiple organisations to see if we can understand the deteriorating patient. I put the problem with a lot of predictive modelling has been that we tend to state the bleeding obvious and warn clinicians about something that they already know. For example, elderly, frail individuals who are very sick tend to do badly. And it's how we pick a needle out of the haystack and pinpoint individuals where intervention will alter outcome. And a good example of that is primary care attendances prior to being admitted as an emergency with bowel perforation. So there's an excellent publication demonstrating that if you normalize attendances, you can see them increase in the months prior to what is a very serious adverse event.
Chris, two minutes, if that's all right.
Nearly there. So
thank you.
So I'll pass this slide. I put this slide in because I got it out of a slide set from 2016, which I thought was quite interesting. And yes, if we've been better at linking data, would we have been better at predicting what was happening? Probably, actually. That is a real shame. The other thing about the epidemic prediction is about 4 years ago, we put in a proposal asking people to opt in for research. And this was to a large funding body. It was turned down on the basis that the view was that people just wouldn't. That's been, it's abundantly clear that that isn't the case. That's been implemented in terms of COVID-19 testing, and opting in has been very high. Wearables. So we did a lot of work in terms of public and patient involvement and engagement, particularly relating to people living with dementia. And James Hadlow on the call presented that data to the APPG last year. And I think what we did there was we took a group that was going to be very, very difficult, a bit like Richard's data linkage. We knew it was going to be a challenge, and use that as a use case for how we might overcome barriers. Obviously, my aim would, in a closed healthcare system like Kent, would be to develop smart healthcare, using all sorts of data flows, linking them all, and allowing much better health planning and much better prospective intervention in the primary care setting, as well as secondary care. So Mark's, I've nicked these from Mark, but give the data back, save lives, not data, radically open and share my data. So just a couple of reflections following COVID. There was a good publication by Tim Gardner in June from the Health Foundation, looking at people's attitudes to how healthcare is delivered. And they have changed dramatically since the COVID-19 pandemic. There have been 12 million downloads and counting of the COVID-19 app, and we can all, I don't want to get into long discussion about how that's being run, but I think it shows an appetite for people to be involved. I, of course, found an article in the Daily Telegraph suggesting that they wouldn't be downloading the app. I didn't read the entire thing because I'm not prepared to subscribe to it. And I think the final thing to say is that there's been a lot of increased use of secondary use of data in the COVID pandemic. And I think we need to push very hard to for people who sit on panels trying to prevent the secondary use of healthcare data, to demonstrate where the harm has been in opening up data in the setting of COVID-19. Because I can tell you, we've got many, many, many examples of significant good. An example, Ben Goldacre's paper of 17 million individuals, which guides my practice daily in terms of giving people advice about their risk of death as a result of COVID-19. So that's my thought. Thanks very much.
It's brilliant, Chris. Thank you.
You're gagging when nobody's laughing, but hopefully
we're all laughing on mute.
Oh,
we all had to be on mute because we were laughing so hard.
Yes,
but I think that's the right point to end on. And I would give people the challenge, and we've done it before, of I think when you talk about the secondary use of data, it immediately sounds pejorative. So it immediately makes it easy for people to say we're not doing that, because it's people who don't know anything about it going, hang on a minute, this isn't the primary reason you're doing it. I'm already nervous, kind of thing. So we just need a better word, and it's something, data for improvement is a bit dry. So there's a kind of competition in there. If someone can come up with a better phrase which we use than secondary use. I'm going to race us on because we've got, I want to give Chris B the 15 minutes as well, which we can just do, and the kind of minute or so for me to wrap up. So thanks for that, Chris F. Chris B, if you're ready, share your screen and we're all yours. There you go.
Right, hello, yes, I'll be briefish. So my name is Chris Beeley. I work for Nottinghamshire Healthcare NHS Trust. I've always worked in the NHS. Not in Kent, no, indeed. Haven't had the offer yet. I've always worked in the NHS, so I'm going to be talking about the NHS a lot. I guess some of this stuff probably applies elsewhere. You can draw your own conclusions. So here's me on Twitter, ranting as usual about open source. Just to reassure everyone, normally in my professional practice, I do talk about open source, and I do it in a very diplomatic, sensible way, and I do PowerPoints and documents and explain things and all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to do that today, really. I feel like that would probably bore a lot of people on this call. Mark assures me that among friends, so I'm going to kind of let rip a bit, and if you think I'm going a bit too far, some of you, then that I've hit it just about right. So let's see how we do with that. Right, so why does open source matter? Oh, I should have said right at the top as well. I meant to say this. I don't know anything about COVID, and to be honest, I don't know a huge amount about data either. So this is probably a little bit different to the normal things, but here I am. So my interest is in code. So I'm a data scientist, and I'm very interested in the open sourcing of code, which is what I'm talking about. So why does open source matter? So the first reason why it matters is if you've done some analysis, if you've done some work, we want to see you working out. And the second reason why it matters, to check it. And the second reason why it matters is if you've built something that does a thing, then we want to use it too. We want to either improve it or we want to just use it straight out of the box. So merely releasing the code is not enough for the second point. The first point is okay. You can just put it, I mean, I've seen some dreadful things. And I should also add another disclaimer, because this is being recorded. The people in my region are pretty good, and my trust are actually pretty switched on as well. So some of the horror stories I'm telling are from far-flung places that I shall not name. But yeah, so merely releasing code, I've seen like zipped code that's not really supported anymore on a Dropbox. That is open source in the most sort of loose sense of the word. And it certainly allows you to look at it and understand how it works, but it does not give you any freedom to reuse it. I'm going to give a very, very quick introduction to software licenses for those who are not familiar. There are lots of software licenses. It's very interesting. If you want to use a different one, that's totally fine. But there are sort of two types, really. There's the permissive license. That's the MIT, represented here by the MIT license, which is a very common one. And that's what I call a Freedom 2 license. So the MIT license, pretty much you can do what you like. So the important thing there being that you can take some code that someone else has written, put it in a product, and then make the code closed source and then sell that code in a proprietary product. And that's the freedom to do that. It's a permissive license. GPL, which is a copyleft license, is very different. So GPL is what I call the freedom from license. GPL protects the community from someone taking some open source code and improving it and making it better, and then putting it inside of a proprietary product and locking it away. So the way that works is that although you can freely reuse GPL code, if you do, you have to release all of the code, not just the code you release, all of the code under the GPL. And that license is therefore absolute anathema to proprietary vendors of software. So those are the two ones. So the 4 freedoms of software. So these are the most important things that we need to be doing with code. So we need to be able to use it, we need to be able to study it, we need to be able to share the code, and we need to be able to improve it. So what I've turned that into is I've turned that into the 4 battles. So those 4 things lead to 4 fights that I have. The first one is the fight to even just use the software. The second one is to share it so we can look at it, so we can check you're working out, so we can learn from what you've done and all that kind of stuff. The third one is to be able to build software and give it away, to collaborate either within an organization or between organizations, make something useful and give it away. And the fourth one is to actually contribute, to be a good guy, to be altruistic, and to improve open source code, not because it's a project or because it's funded or anything like that, just because it's the right thing to do and hey, you've got a good idea. So who's doing this already? So, and people are often surprised about this, so I like to include this. So sometimes people think that open source is a sort of cuddly thing that kind of, governments and charities might do, but actually that's not at all the case. So Facebook, which I think most people would agree is almost the sort of canonically evil corporate leviathan in today's parlance, have a prolific open source program, which I'll talk about more in a second. Microsoft contribute a lot of open source projects. They contribute to the Linux kernel. They do a lot of good stuff, and there are other companies too. I won't go into them all now. So let's just talk very briefly, just to give you a rundown of something that happens in Facebook. So one of the things that Facebook has released is a package called Profit. It's an R and Python package, and it's used in data science, which is why I know about it. And it's for forecasting certain types of data. It's quite a complex forecasting task that they've done it. So they built this thing internally because they do a lot of forecasting in Facebook, as you can imagine. And they gave it away. They gave it away with an MIT license, which is a permissive license. It's essentially it's a do what you like license. Now, why did they do that? Now, obviously, I have no idea why they did that, but I'm going to speculate anyway. So I think the first reason why they did it is because often developers like to collaborate. They like to work in the open. They like to have ideas because they're interested in ideas. So I think doing that helps them to get good people and keep them. I think the other reason why they did it is because they want people to use it so they can get better suggestions about how to improve it. So people will send messages saying, oh, well, when I put my data in, it doesn't work properly, it does this, or I've had an idea, have you thought about this, that kind of thing. The third reason why they want to do it, to give it away, is because they want people to improve it. So they want people to go away and do bug fixes and feature things and just give it back to them. And that if you go on the page, you can see people are doing that all over the world. People are coming on and improving this product that this evil corporate leviathan built and gave away. And I think the fourth reason why they give it away, and this is important, I think, for people to understand, or certainly the people that I've met in the course of my talking about this, is Facebook are not in the business of selling code. That's not what they do all day. They don't employ managers who know to do it. They don't employ salesmen. They don't employ people whose business it is to sell code, and neither does the NHS. With notable exceptions, the NHS doesn't have the faintest idea how to sell code or who to sell it to or what to charge for it. And they just don't want the hassle of selling it. And I don't particularly know why Facebook are, switched on enough to think, let's just give it away, let's not worry about it. But the NHS seems to want to sort of hold on to everything. So how are we doing in terms of those 4 fights that I mentioned? So the use fight, how are we doing with this? So some organizations are still to this day fighting about whether we can use open source code. So for example, R, which is an open source statistical program that I use a lot in my work, people are reluctant to use it because it's open source. They have unfounded fears that it's insecure, or it doesn't work properly, or it's full of bugs or something like that. Now, that is, ludicrous beyond words, really. I really am, to be honest, as I say, this is the unexpurgated version of this talk. I'm really tired of having that fight. Banks use it, clinical trials use it, Google uses it, NASA uses it. It works. The whole thing is a dead argument. So I think we just need to just stop having that. Right, the second one, sharing, and so people can learn. We're getting somewhere with this. I think more and more organizations are now realizing that it's a good idea to let people learn from what they're doing. And it's a good idea to make sure that they share things so they can say, we've done this, here's the working out, what do you think? And I think obviously COVID, which as I say, I don't really know anything about, pushed that argument on, which is really great. Building stuff. So how are we doing with building stuff and giving it away? This is largely a pipe dream. I'm prepared to be wrong. Please do contact me if you know. There are pockets, but I think still, particularly building between organizations, I think building something within one organization and giving it away does happen from time to time. But the idea the NHS would sort of spontaneously collaborate on something is, I think, not a very good idea. And in terms of contributing, sort of being a good guy, a good citizen, and contributing upstream, like I said that Microsoft do, the previous speaker did a really nice line for this, which is, does it pass the Daily Mail test? So yes, that's what I meant when I said imagine the headlines. Imagine the Daily Mail headline if they found NHS programmers sitting around improving Facebook's algorithm that's being given away. That doesn't really pass the Daily Mail test. However, it's being done by these big hard-nosed, corporate entities that make billions of pounds a year. So maybe it is the right thing to do after all. And maybe the Daily Mail, were they to say that, would in fact be wrong. Right, so what's the problem? Why are we doing so badly about this? And why do I spend so much of my time talking about this when really what I'd like to be doing is doing data science? So I think the basic problem is that the default is that we don't share. So I think sometimes a lot of people, they have this idea. So, we write 122 lines of terrible R that's very inefficient and not very well commented, like I do many times. And there's this idea that we can somehow sell it, that it's somehow worth anything, which again, that argument really needs to die. The code that I write has no monetary value, okay? That's just true. So it can be given away freely without any concern about that. And there are other reasons too. So for example, secrecy protects professional reputations. People don't want to give away their code. People are worried about looking stupid, and that's a natural human instinct that you find everywhere. I don't want to look stupid either. My code is not brilliant. I'm sure there are lots of problems with it that I'm not even aware of. And I don't want to put it up on the internet because I'm really worried that someone will come along and burst my bubble. But I publish it anyway because it's the right thing to do. Secrecy serves the interests of the employing organization. Organizations don't want people poking around. They don't want people looking at the data. They don't want people looking at what we're doing and picking holes in it and saying, well, why are you doing that? And why does it do this? And how many people, they don't want that. They just want to just lock everything away and just do what they do. And we know best. And that obviously in the NHS was the culture. If you look globally at the whole culture in the NHS, that was the way things were for a long time. People, I often ask to see people's working out because I want to, A, because I'm just interested, and B, because sometimes I want to check it. And they're usually amazed that anybody would possibly want to see their working out. And it's often in an absolutely awful mess. And the reason why it's in such a horrific mess, of course, is because they never thought that anybody would want to look at it. And I have to say that many times I've asked to see people's working out. They've done this big flourish at a PowerPoint presentation or whatever, presented all these beautiful results, and the results are straight up wrong. When I check. And of course, it's too long and the conversation's moved on. So I think that's a problem. Right, so even more problems. So NHS contracts, again, in the main, are pretty similar in terms of intellectual property and copyright. So they include something, this is just randomly, I'm not having to go at this organization, they all look pretty much like this is just randomly off Google. Basically what it says is, if you write some code when you work here in your normal working hours, then we own that code. And as I say, largely that's what NHS contracts look like. And I'm sure there's a reason why they put that in. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not arguing with them. But actually, that's just part of law anyway. In theory, I think they could drop that. I'm sure there's a reason why they don't. But in fact, that's just copyright law. It's called work for hire. And if you make something in the course of your normal duties, your employing organization automatically owns the copyright. So the reason why I'm saying this is because we can't avoid this issue, okay? We can't just wish copyright away because it's automatically assigned at the moment of creation. As soon as you produce something, it's automatically copyright, and that copyright belongs to your organization. So therefore, it's not yours to give away. You can't just open source it. You can't do that. Now, copyright matters. Why does copyright matter? So if you open source something, you don't have exclusive rights to make money out of it. Although you can make money from open source products, and people do, you don't have to be the copyright owner to do that. Anybody can do that. So it seems strange that people would argue about it. I think there are two reasons why it matters. The first thing is because they can relicense the code. So, and this has happened, it's quite rare, but it does happen. There's a big open source project and the person who owns the copyright thinks, you know what, I don't like this license, I'm going to change the license. And they change the license. And the people who've contributed to the code base and got involved with the project and helped write the documentation are not very happy, because they're like, well, I did all this stuff under one license and now it's under a different license. And I don't like that new license. And so I'm not very happy. So that's a problem. And the other problem I think is probably more common is just people just like to fight over things, because it's human nature, isn't it? It's like kids in the playground. They want to be the guy holding the football at the end of the day, don't they? People just like to have the shiny thing. So when you're looking across organizational boundaries, and of course the NHS is split into, thousands of pieces or whatever it is, there's a lot of organizational boundaries to span. People just like to fight about it, and it's a waste of time and energy. So what can we do about it?
Chris,
So,
we're going to have a probably hard stop about 12. So hard stop at 12. So just to warn you.
I'm absolutely bang on. I've got my timer on.
Brilliant.
I'm doing it exactly 15
Thank
minutes.
you,
So
brilliant.
what do we do about this? So civil servants, people who work for the government, they don't bother about any of this stuff that I'm talking about, because everything they write is copyright of the Crown. That's just how it works. So the Department of Transport don't have a war with the Department for Education, because it's all, in copyright terms, it's all the same. And a lot of people in the civil service, certainly in terms of data science, are good guys, and they release stuff under the MIT license. And that works really, really well. So I think basically what we need to get towards in the NHS is that there should be a presumption that we're really, it's all about defaults, isn't it? There should be a default that we release the code. You should be the manager arguing with you about why we're not going to release the code, rather than you arguing with the manager about how we should. Not data. And I know this is a controversial point to make here, but in my line of work, yes, it'd be great to have data out there and synthetic data and whatever else. But in terms of open source, I think we need to just drop. It's a red herring argument people throw up about not sharing their code. Oh, we have to worry about privacy. There's nothing private in the code. Just get it out there. Everyone should just pick one of those two licenses I mentioned. There are other ones. If you want to go and find another one, go for your life. But those are the two that are common. Just go for it. If it's something that you're producing in your organization, just get it out there. That should be the default. Just release it. And if it's a collaborative project, if you've got 4 or 5 organizations all working together, it will be NHS organizations. There might be any kinds of group. Just assign the project to the Crown, assign it to a trusted third party and say, you look after the copyright, because I don't trust that person not to relicense it, and I don't want to have a fight. Just give it to the Crown and just get on with it. And here endeth the lesson.
Chris, that's brilliant. We've got 1 minute to go. I'm really grateful for that. And Paul has, in the past, got these within an hour, and I thought I was going to fail, but we've just got there. I'm really grateful. The only comment I would make on all of that is, given some of the stuff that Paul and I and others have been doing over the last 6 months and meeting loads of new people, can we work together to help? You've laid out 4 challenges. We've set out 4 sort of pillars of things that we want to try and break in quite a bullish way, which I think is a similar style to yours. So I would just like to have a longer conversation with you and Paul about how we can help, because it feels like you're not doing this on your own, but to some extent you are. It doesn't feel like there's 20 people like you doing this. There might be, and you might know them all, but it's just an offer to help, really. Paul and I have spent a bit of time putting this together. We've got good links into Health Foundation and NHSD and others, and it would be great to work more closely with
great.
you.
Well, it's a kindred fight, isn't it? Yeah, it's not the same fight, but it's a kindred fight. So absolutely, yeah. It's
pretty close, yeah. So it's 12 o'clock. I said I'd be done by 12, so we will be. 3 fantastic speakers. Really grateful. We will be back in touch. We've got a website now. We will publish everything that's been on here. I think it might be useful, if it's possible, to try and capture a lot of what's in the chat retrospectively in a Google Doc or something. So we will try and get all of that out there as well. We will be in touch. We've had over 50 people on here. Another one if you include the baby that someone brought, which is great. So we will try and put these together a couple of times a month. Spread the word. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you soon. Paul, any last comment you want to make? We're going to let people have a sandwich.
I'll just come off mute. Please join in. It will be fun. That's it.
I like that. Okay, we'll speak to you all soon. Take care, everyone.